I rise to speak on behalf of the Greens in support of establishing this select committee. The symbols of the Nazi regime continue to represent the ideology of racial supremacy that fuelled the Holocaust and continued to cause harm, especially to the Jewish community. We know that far-right extremism is on the rise as they try to capitalise on people's fear and uncertainty, particularly during the pandemic, and I'm particularly worried about the radicalisation of young people who are targeted online by extremist groups who seek to exploit vulnerable and isolated people. It's why it is so important that we get our approach to banning the public display of Nazi symbols right and recognise that this is just the first of many steps that must be taken to combat neo-Nazis, white supremacy and far-right extremism. This is, of course, not the first time we have discussed the impact of anti-Semitism on our community this year in this place. And before I go on further, I do wish to briefly address some comments that I previously made in this place. In that previous debate on June 14th, 2022, when speaking to Parliament on the debate of the adoption of the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism, I spoke to who is a Semite. I was referring to both a protest on the steps that had happened that day and a previous debate in this Parliament where a motion to recognise the State of Palestine had been rejected. However, I note that it could have been inferred from my statement that anti-Semitism was not directed just at Jews. However, Jewish members of the Greens have indeed informed me that the intention that I had was misinterpreted, and certainly that while discussing anti-Semitism, to raise that in the way that I did could be seen itself as anti-Semitic and indeed erasing Jewish identity. And to be clear, they have assured me that no Jew identifies as a Semite, nor is any non-Jew a target of anti-Semitism. I accept that, and I understand the hurt that my words caused them. It was not intentional, and indeed erasing anti-Semitism does amount to the cancelling of Jewish personhood. I therefore wish to apologise to the Jewish community of South Australia for those words, and I do apologise for any offence caused. There is no room for anti-Semitism or any form of racism in our community. I accept those words caused distress. It was not my intent. Nazi symbols are often a gateway to violence and are used as a recruitment tool by extremists, and banning them could be a game changer in tackling hate. The Nazi symbol is also used to direct intolerance towards other groups within our community. Bigots have used it as a cover-all hate symbol to vilify migrants and asylum seekers, Muslims, people of other faiths, the LGBTIQA+ community, First Nations people and multicultural communities. It also means that we will finally be able to properly address the worrying increase in Nazi symbols that are popping up in our capital city of late, particularly those stickers that show up in the CBD and indeed the postering and stickering of election candidates, corflutes who've had their election signs targeted by neo-Nazis. I certainly hope that together with hate crimes legislation that we passed last year, I note hate crimes legislation that the Greens, and indeed was my bill that passed the Parliament last year, we will have many more tools to tackle this scourge. Legislation to ban the intentional display of Nazi symbols will help us tackle the increasingly public displays of hate we are seeing from extreme far-right and neo-Nazi groups. These symbols have no place in our society, and we must strengthen our laws and resolve to tackle the actual and implied hate of Nazi symbols and the far-right movement more broadly. I would like to also take this opportunity to say that people might view things such as displaying symbols or putting stickers around the city as fairly supposedly innocuous activities that surely couldn't do that much damage. This is not the case. For example, the Sydney Morning Herald earlier this year released an investigation into the methods neo-Nazis used to organise, recruit and radicalise, and documented the use of these stickers, posters and graffiti featuring Nazi and far-right slogans and symbols as part of a recruitment drive. Images and words have meanings. Symbols are powerful. And whether we're seeing fascist salutes on the steps of the Adelaide Holocaust Museum and Steiner Education Centre or stickers in Rundle Mall, we need to recognise that the weaponisation of these symbols and the power that they can have as recruitment tools can do real harm to real people. Because unfortunately, and though I wish it was not the case, Nazi symbolism, and indeed Nazism, doesn't exist solely in the past. Anti-Semitism, neo-Nazism, white supremacy and far-right extremism are a scourge, and we cannot allow these forces to gain further footholds in our society. South Australia, of course, would not be the first jurisdiction to legislate a ban on displaying Nazi symbols, but we should be the next one. I would like to acknowledge the work of my interstate Greens colleagues in this space, and in particular Samantha Ratnam and Abigail Boyd. Their efforts have been vital to Victoria and New South Wales banning the public display of Nazi symbols, and I hope that South Australia will follow along that path as well. I note that in both of those states, the legislation was preceded by an inquiry such as the one that we are about to vote on today. And I think it's vitally important that as a parliament and as a community we investigate this matter properly to ensure any legislation we end up implementing is fit for purpose. We need to ensure that there are fair exemptions so that, for example, we permit the continued use of the swastika by the people of Buddhist, Hindu, Jain and other faiths. This symbol was only co-opted by Hitler's Third Reich last century, but has for thousands of years before been a positive symbol of faith. It is important that practitioners of these faiths can continue to use it. There must also be exemptions for the good faith display of Nazi symbols for artists, academics, law enforcement and others, including for the display of this symbol in opposition to fascism, neo-Nazis and Nazis. And of course, we must allow for the display of this symbol for educational purposes. There is so much work for this committee to do, and I commend those in this place who are committed to taking these first steps. The Australian Federal Police have previously called for a ban on extremist insignia and propaganda, and I look forward to South Australia taking this important step in halting the glorification of Nazis and stopping the intimidation of the community, and particularly marginalised communities, with targeted displays of this symbol. We can and we must continue to work to stop the slow creep of fascism, of hate, of racism and of discrimination in our society. I commend the motion.